The wind howled over the desolate plains of Dustwood, a place where silence often carried more weight than words, and where the sun set like a burning ember behind the mountains, painting the world in gold and sorrow. Jebediah Kane, the brooding cowboy of few words, rode alone through the gathering dusk, his hat pulled low over his eyes, the ache of the past buried deep behind a stony expression. He wasn't riding toward anything, only away from what had already burned him down. He'd spent years chasing cattle, whiskey, and forgetfulness. But that all ended the night the sheriff was gunned down and the town council demanded he take the widow's hand, by law or by force. The sheriff's widow, Clara Hensley, was a name whispered with both pity and respect. She was young still, far too young to wear black for the rest of her life. And yet she did so with quiet dignity. Her husband had been the law, and in his death, the town feared lawlessness would return unless someone like Jeb took his place, a man of grit, a man who wouldn't bend. But what the townsfolk didn't know was that Jeb had sworn never to love again. Not after the war, not after the fire that took his family's ranch. And certainly not after seeing what marriage did to a man's soul. Yet when Clara opened that creaking wooden door, the smell of baking bread and lilac soap washing over him, something in his chest shifted. She wasn't the porcelain, fragile thing he expected. Her eyes met his, steady as a drawn gun. "So they sent you," she said softly, her voice like the calm before a storm. Jeb nodded once. "Ain't my idea," he said, his tone flat. "Town says I'm to marry you. Keep order." For a moment, the two simply looked at each other. Two broken souls bound by duty, not desire. But in that silence, beneath the hum of the prairie wind, an understanding passed, unspoken but powerful. Clara turned, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "If this is to be a farce," she murmured, "then let's at least make it decent." And with that, the brooding cowboy found himself standing in front of a preacher 2 days later. His jaw set tight as Clara's trembling hand slipped into his. The ceremony was quick, the applause hollow. When it ended, she walked beside him to the modest homestead that had once belonged to her and the late sheriff. The house felt heavy with ghosts. His boots echoed against the wooden floor as she showed him where he'd sleep, separate room, of course. Jeb removed his hat, nodded, and said only, "Fine." But that night, as thunder rolled across the plains and lightning split the sky, he found her sitting by the hearth, staring into the flames, her face bathed in gold and shadow. "You miss him," Jeb said quietly. "Every day," she whispered. "But it's not him I see in my dreams anymore." The confession startled him, though he said nothing. The fire crackled between them like the heartbeat of something alive, wild and forbidden. Days turned to weeks, and though they lived like strangers under the same roof, something was changing. Jeb found himself fixing fences that didn't need mending, just to be near her garden. He'd watch her hang laundry, her sleeves rolled, the soft line of her neck catching the morning sun, and he'd curse himself for noticing. One morning, while mending the corral, he saw her struggling with a stubborn horse, her late husband's old stallion. Restless and wild, the beast reared. And without thinking, Jeb was there, wrapping his arms around her waist to pull her clear. They fell hard into the dust, her body landing against his, breath mingling, hearts pounding. "You could have been killed," he said roughly. "So could you," she shot back, defiant and breathless. Their eyes met, and for the first time, something in him broke free from the chains he'd welded around his heart. He stood abruptly, brushing off dirt, and muttered, "I don't aim to let another soul die around me." But that night, when the crickets sang and the lantern burned low, Clara found herself standing outside his door. She hesitated, her fingers trembling before knocking softly. He opened it, shirt half-buttoned, eyes dark with confusion and want. "What is it?" he asked. She took a shaky breath. "You carry too much pain, Jeb. Let me share some." The words hit him harder than a bullet. He wanted to push her away. To keep his promise never to love again, but when she reached up and touched his face, he froze. Her touch was gentle, steady, real. The moment stretched, two souls who'd been alone too long finally colliding. He caught her hand, meaning to stop her, but his thumb brushed her lips instead. And then, without another word, she kissed him. It was soft at first, uncertain. But the second their lips met, the prairie seemed to come alive, the wind outside howled like it was cheering them on. The lantern flickered, and the world beyond the walls disappeared. When they broke apart, both breathless, Jeb's voice was low and raw. "Clara, this ain't what we were forced into." She looked up at him, tears glistening. "No," she whispered, "this is what we were meant for." The words undid him. He kissed her again, deeper this time. The fire between them burning away years of grief and silence. Outside, the storm passed, leaving only stillness and the faint scent of rain over the open plains. In the days that followed, the town whispered about how the widow and the brooding cowboy seemed to change, how laughter returned to her porch, how his cold eyes had softened. But they didn't know the truth. That forced union had become something sacred, born not from law but from fire and redemption. When spring came and the first wildflowers painted the prairie, Clara stood on the porch watching Jeb saddle his horse for another long day's ride. "Don't be late for supper," she called, smiling. He turned, a rare grin tugging at his lips. "Wouldn't dream of it, Mrs. Kane." And as the sun dipped low again, the prairie glowed, no longer silent, no longer cold. The kiss that had set it aflame still lingered in the air, a promise of something lasting. Love had found them when neither believed it could. And this time, Jeb Kane vowed he'd never let it die. The prairie had turned green again, soft and breathing after the long winter. But peace never lasted long in Dustwood. Jebediah Kane knew that better than anyone. The scent of gun oil and storm clouds always followed men like him, no matter how far they rode. Since the day he and Clara had found something real amidst the ashes of obligation, he'd almost begun to believe that life could quiet down, that maybe, just maybe, the world had stopped taking things from him. But that illusion shattered the morning three riders came thundering into town, dust swirling behind them like smoke from a funeral pyre. They were outlaws, faces half hidden beneath bandanas, eyes full of the kind of hate that comes from too much whiskey and too little mercy. Word spread fast, they'd been part of the gang the sheriff, Clara's first husband, had once run out of Dustwood. Now they were back, hungry for vengeance. And their target wasn't the lawman anymore, it was his widow. When Jeb heard, he dropped his hammer mid-swing and mounted his horse without a word. He'd spent months learning the rhythms of married life, the sound of Clara's laughter in the kitchen, the feel of her hand brushing against his in quiet moments, but none of that dulled the instinct that came alive in him now. Violence was an old language, one he'd sworn to forget but could never quite unlearn. As he rode toward town, wind whipping his coat, a single thought burned through him like gunpowder: no one would take her from him. Clara stood on the porch when she saw him, fear trembling just beneath her brave face. "They're saying they'll come for me, Jeb," she whispered. "They think hurting me will avenge what the sheriff did." He dismounted, boots crunching the gravel, his jaw tight. "They'll have to go through me first," he said, voice low, deadly calm. That night, the wind rose again, and the plains seemed to hold their breath. Jeb cleaned his rifle by lamplight, while Clara watched from the doorway, worry shadowing her every movement. "You don't have to fight their war," she said softly. "I can leave. Run if I must." He looked up at her, eyes like steel. "And spend the rest of my life wondering if you're safe?" "No, ma'am. I've run from enough ghosts." She stepped closer, her hand resting over his. "Then let me fight beside you." Her courage both terrified and humbled him. "You're a brave woman," he murmured, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "But if anything happened to you..." He couldn't finish. Instead, He stood, cupping her face gently. You changed me, Clara. You gave me reason to live again. I won't lose that. And before she could reply, he kissed her, fierce, desperate. Full of everything he hadn't said aloud. It wasn't the tender first kiss by the fire. This was a promise carved into the dark. At dawn, the horizon.